I'm here with Tiago Forte, and the question that drives Tiago is how can humans reach their creative potential? And to answer that question, he teaches and writes about new ways for you to thrive in our digital world. Over the last decades, he's helped thousands of people build a second brain, and recently he published his book, aptly named Building a Second Brain. And I read it, I loved it. So I'm super happy that Tiago said yes to my invitation to come on the show. And here he is. So, Tiago, is there anything you would like to add to that introduction?
No, that was great. I'm happy to be here, Lucas.
Perfect. I was actually hooked on this book very early on. As soon as I learned in, I think, the introductory chapter, actually, that what triggered you to go on this journey of discovering best practices for unlocking creativity, note taking. You talk about struggling with a severe vocal disorder, and then you decided to take matters in your own hands and becoming the project manager of your own condition. I really like that quote. You discovered that there is actually a mind body connection and how note taking became an essential instrument in overcoming it. And having overcome a mind body issue of my own that is also conventionally seen as purely physical, can only be treated through extensive medication, all that. I went down that rabbit hole as well, and the outcome wasn't pretty, let's put it that way. And then I was stunned to see how many parallels are between your experience and mine. Because my turning point was also when I decided to take charge, start experimenting with better nutrition, exercise, stress management, and of course, getting out of my head by starting to writing things down. So I knew early on I was going to like this book. And I would like to ask you, what is your view on the mind body connection?
Yeah, wow. It's true. I found when you're going through something like this, you feel like it's all only you. You feel like you're by yourself. No one understands. No one gets it. No one cares. Like no one else's business. They wouldn't even really care if they knew. But over the past few years, as I've begun to tell that story more often and in more detail, I find it's just mind blowing to me how common it is. Like any one condition, any specific condition, it may be rare, but having a condition or some recurring pain or infection or limitation or symptom is almost seems like it's universal. Almost everyone seems to have something like that is kind of unexplainable. And that's why I opened the book with that story. And yeah, what that experience sent me down is a long rabbit trail of experiences that really highlighted and had me discover the mind body connection, which I had sort of heard of, like I kind of knew it abstractly. We've grown up kind of hearing about the mind body connection. If you had told me back before this time, do you believe that the mind affects the body and vice versa? Obviously, of course. But it's very different going through the experience yourself of actually seeing how closely interrelated they are, how completely intertwined they are at every level, and that both sides of yourself, the mind and the body, need care. They need attention. They need maintenance.
Mm.
They need you to connect with them. The two sides of yourself have to be connected. So I talk about going down the path of note taking and knowledge management, which is sort of the intellectual side in the book. And I maybe just hint at the other side, which is going down the path of meditation and spirituality and emotional awareness, emotional deep like practices that I've undergone over the last years to connect with my emotions, understand them, allow them to rise to the surface, allow them to be expressed. And in some ways, that's the more challenging journey. That's the deeper journey or the one that is even less appreciated and less understood. But the last thing I'll say is just that having productivity and note taking and these practical things to free up your time and allow you to follow through on things help it can also help you with the more mysterious right brain spiritual things. They would just like the mind and body, the analytical and the metaphysical also have this interplay. And I really think as human beings, as holistic, modern people, we need both sides.
That is so big. That is something I can only not in agreement with because I also went through a condition that is, I would say, very noticeable. I think you can argue that a vocal disorder like the one you describe in your book, it is noticeable when it's there and when it gets better for you, but also for the outside world. In my case, it was a severe skin problem, which
Mm,
has very similar, let's say, dogmas around it. saying, oh, it's not curable, or we don't know where it comes from, just keep kind of masking the symptoms physically, never even considering that psychological aspect to it. But then I stumbled upon this book, which perhaps looks familiar to you, The Mind
I've
Body
read
Connection.
that.
Yeah,
I've read that, yes.
yes, yes, me too. This has been a major turning point for me. And so, like you said, helping those emotions come to the surface. Well, what's a great way to put things to the surface? That is by writing things down, of course. So, like you said, there's this big interconnection between what you preach in the book and how it is bigger than just the thing itself. It has bigger implications, basically. It's so beautiful to me because I also went through that kind of experience. I also enjoyed learning about the history of note taking because it's not like you bring out the book, now everybody's going to just discover that we can actually take notes. Commonplace books have been used by the intellectual elites like scientists and philosophers and artists throughout history across various cultures as well to manage information. Because in the end, that's what a big piece of the puzzle is here. And nowadays, though, as information density increases, you argue that we would all benefit from having a digital commonplace book that you've called a second brain. So the question is, why do we now need a second brain?
Yeah, yeah, that's a big part of what I do is highlight history. If you think this is this brand new thing that has never existed before, that may be exciting, but it's also like, well, most of us aren't trying to reinvent modern human life. Most of us are
Sure.
trying to just solve problems, save time, reduce stress, and live a fruitful and productive and meaningful life day to day. And so I really try to highlight that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We are just, we're a part of a long, long legacy of people throughout history doing this exact thing, externalizing their thoughts and ideas in writing, revisiting and making sense of and synthesizing that writing to make decisions, to make sense of the world, to produce new communication and new ideas. The difference, as you hinted at, is in the past, there was only the intellectual elite that needed those things, right? Going back to the 1800s, 1700s, it was only renowned philosophers, world famous writers, heads of state who even had access to that the volume of information that necessitated this thing, this system, the second brain. Now that has been democratized, which is wonderful. We all now have access to all the information, all the knowledge, all the answers we could ever want. But it's also a curse. It's a blessing and a curse because unlike a head of state or a famous artist, we don't have assistants and people who work for us and a whole team of archivists managing all of this for us. It's all us. All of that information and decisions and choices and uncertainty is on our own shoulders, right? Not only do we have our full-time job and our main thing, we also have a part-time job as an information archivist, an information manager. And there's just no time. There's just no time left in the day. And so I have really sought to provide a set of frameworks and techniques and tools that allow people to execute that responsibility effectively, the responsibility of managing information, managing knowledge without taking a decade of trial and error like I spent and without taking hours and hours per day, which, a couple hundred years ago would have been needed to manage all of this stuff on paper.
As you talked about this, it occurred to me that the literacy rate has actually only very recently increased to a point where the majority of the world population is actually able to read and write. So, in a way, it is actually quite new still for us at this scale to process information and put it down on paper ourselves, and adds to that this increased density of information screaming at us from all places and all corners, all times of the day. This book may be more prudent than you may even give yourself credit for, or that I gave it credit for, frankly, because yes, for the elites, like you talk about in history, yes, they've been doing it for longer, but we now are all getting more information than they ever did. Plus, it's a relatively new skill in general to be able to read and write. So
Oh
that
yeah.
just occurred to
It's
me.
so new. I never thought of it this way, but it's funny. How much time passed between the invention of writing and universal literacy or near universal literacy? Thousands of years. Took
Right.
thousands of years for that skill to disseminate throughout the world population. Now,
Yeah,
we have this whole new technology, which is technology, modern technology, that was invented, what, past 20, 30, 40 years? It's like the printing press was just invented, like, yesterday.
right. Yeah,
We're, like, trying to figure out, "Oh, what is this thing? How does it work? What's our relationship to it? How do we use it effectively?" So, I think we can all give ourselves a break that we haven't
yeah.
completely figured it out yet.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And if you think, as humans, we've existed for 200,000 years or something. So all of that is literally just at the very end of the total, line of history there. So yeah, your book, like you said, is a culmination of 10 years of trial and error on your part. And that really shines through the book. It's very methodical. And I can tell, wow, this took so much effort, not only to write it, which is a whole nother story. You wrote about that in an article, which I read, like writing the book and what it took for you, but just to come up with a system that is as robust as it is right now. So my next question is about this method, which you've named codes, which is short for capture, organize, distill, and express. Those are the four main stages of how to process information, basically. And I love how you wrote in your book that this turns you from a taker of notes into a giver of notes because you're giving valuable information to your future self. Could you speak to the code method in a bit more detail? What are the stages and how do they work?
Yeah, so the heart of the book is it's a methodology that describes the creative process. What is the creative process? What are the steps? What is the beginning, the middle, and the end? And the reason this is the core of the book is a second brain as a system doesn't really exist as independently of the projects that you use it to execute. So I'll say that again is a second brain is simply the collection of tools that you assemble, that you bring together and you utilize to execute a project. So sometimes people will, say, okay, let me build my second brain, spend a few months just tinkering away and building that. And then once it's perfectly ready and polished, then I'll think about some projects that I might want to use it in. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like how, cooking is only the tools and techniques you use to produce food. Imagine if someone spent several months preparing to cook and never cooked anything. No, the way you cook, to learn to cook, the way you create a system for cooking, is by actually making things,
Yeah, I
right?
got like $5,000 worth of utensils, but I don't yet know how to make a sandwich.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You haven't hard boiled an egg and you have,
Mm-mm.
thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of preparation. It makes absolutely no sense. And so code is really how it describes a linear process. It's directional. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is capture, which is the C. Things have to come in. They have to be documented. They have to be written down. Then they go through a couple steps to be processed or refined, which is organize, which is the O, and distill, which is the D. And then finally, they have to become outputs. They have to go and have some impact on someone or something outside of your head, outside of your computer. And that's the E for express. And I'm happy to walk through those in more detail if you'd like.
Sure. Well, I think to start off with the capturing portion, there's, I guess, a whole conversation we could have about how that works, how you can use all kinds of tools and methods to get as much as possible out of your head as quickly as possible. But one part of the book, when it concerns capturing, is how do you decide what to capture? And for that, you cite Richard Feynman's 12 favorite problems, which is a series of open ended questions that you always have on your mind to test new findings against, to spark the creative process in deciding what to capture. So my question is, what are some of your favorite problems?
Yeah, absolutely. I have all sorts of them written all in different places throughout my second brain, actually. I have one practical one that I always think about, which is how can I make it a habit to exercise for 30 minutes every day?
Mm,
That's like so mundane and just like practical. I have big picture ones like how can we actually make an impact on climate change while continuing to lead abundant lives that are not limited. I have another one which is how to build a team and a company while still retaining my solo creative time as a writer. I have another one which is how to utilize the best capabilities of technology while not having my attention, fragmented by it. Those are just a few, but
mm,
they range from practical to theoretical, from short term to long term, from big picture to small picture. It's all good. It all works, and they're all useful as you said, sort of a lens, like a filter to tell you what to capture, which is anything that might be relevant to any of those open questions.
Right. That is so cool because, like you said, it's really ranges from something relatively small and individually based, like exercising, to fixing climate change and anything and everything in between. I never thought about capturing this methodically. Capturing is obviously a part of multiple productivity methods, including getting things done, which is the one I've been subscribed to for quite a few years. It's the first step. But the way I perceived it is that you kind of follow your intuition. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's served me greatly, but I love how this adds this methodical layer to it to make it even more clear what it is that you capture, give you even more direction, so to speak. So that's really cool. And thanks for sharing those examples. Is there anything else people should know about the capturing process?
Yeah, it's funny because I have a couple of these checklists or frameworks for what to capture. They're very logical, very rational, step by step. But the deeper principle here is what you just said. Day to day, minute to minute, the basis that I'm actually using to decide what to capture is my intuition. It's what I call resonance, right? It's like think about going through your day. You already have such limited bandwidth, you have such limited attention. You don't have time to run through the step by step checklist like, oh, like this just takes up too much energy and time. And so what I really look for is just what moves me, what makes the hair stand up on my arm or gives me goosebumps or makes my eyes kind of widen in surprise, what jumps out at me as unusual or interesting or counterintuitive or shocking. That is really the quickest and easiest and most direct way to decide what to capture, is what resonates with you, what kind of touches you on a subconscious level, which your subconscious has, like we talked about with the mind body connection, has so much intelligence, right? It's like 1% of your intelligence is like above the neck, and below the neck
Mm.
is like 99% or something. And so by tapping into your intuition and what resonates, you are tapping into the other 99% of intelligence that you can't access otherwise.
Right. That's really beautiful. It really allows your gut feelings to become more concrete. And it's no coincidence that the gut is also below the neck, of course. That's probably why they call it that. So that's really cool. Next stage is organizing. And this is basically, yeah, to give a place to all that input that you've decided is relevant, that resonates with you. And for that, you have a sort of sub methodology, if I may call it that, which is PARA. You're very big on the acronyms. And I remember in the book, you also talk about acronyms that are no more than 4 letters. Those are easy to remember. So you've stuck with that very well. There are projects, areas, resources, and archives. And the aim is to organize not by topic, file type, or category like we usually tend to do, but more so by the actionability of the piece of information. That's at least what I took from it. Could you give a quick run through of the para methods? How does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So within code is sort of the top level. I don't just tell you what the steps are and then, oh, figure them out on your own. Like, good luck. One of those letters has one practical tool, one very concrete technique that you can actually use to do that thing. So you're right. Under O, the technique is called para, which is essentially just how to organize your digital world, how to organize your notes, your files, your to-dos. I mean, really everything. And what you said is exactly the principle that I've found so transformational for people, which is instead of organizing your digital information in these huge broad categories, like economics or business or psychology or architecture or design, as if you're a library, because you're not a library, you really want to organize it according to actionability. And what that means is start with what is most actionable, and then what is less actionable, and then what is least actionable. And what
Mm,
that tends to look like for most people is 4 categories. Your projects are always the most actionable. That's what's cooking, what's active right at this moment. If not there, then your areas of responsibility, those are things you're responsible for, but that are more long-term, kind of ongoing over time. If not there, your resources, which is all the other kinds of information that you might want to access in the future. And then finally, archives, the by far the least actionable, which is everything from the previous 3 categories that is finished, that is complete, that is no longer active, that is no longer relevant. So you're basically organizing your knowledge so that most of your attention, the great majority of your attention is always going over here to the most actionable categories.
Mm.
And then much less of your attention is going over here to the non-actionable categories.
That's very interesting because that is indeed how I've been organizing a lot of my information. Indeed, like I am a library. I think that's a good quote. You're not a library. You're a human being and you want to take action with the things that have the highest priority. And the power method really seems like a way to make that more accessible. But I'm just so used to organizing my information in this way, kind of hierarchical, where I take the general area that it's related to, which could be actually an equivalent of what you call the areas of responsibility, and then see, okay, my projects, my routines, etc., which area do they belong to? Now with GCD, there's yet another dimension to it, which adds context as the primary kind of mode of operation when you actually want to do things. Do you see this often that people come in with one of your courses or people who have read your book like me with this mindset of organizing the information like a library? And what is the key to making that change to a para approach? Or what are some of the challenges they encounter?
Oh yeah, it's so common. I mean, it's so
Mm,
common. That's what we're taught. Oh, in school, make a class notebook, divide it up into sections, one section per class or one notebook per subject, right? We are taught to organize information and take notes in a way that is completely passive, that is completely siloed, that is completely just to regurgitate for one test or to write one paper, and then you never access it again. There's no movement. It's all static. It goes in one
mm,
place and then it just sticks there forever. Whereas pair is all about this movement. Individual pieces of information are
mm,
constantly moving between projects, areas, resources, and archives all the time. It's like an ecosystem. I think it's very counterintuitive. It's just completely different from what we've been taught. And it does take some effort, right? Like you have to, it's so amazing to me how impactful it is for people to just make a list of their projects.
mm,
Like many people out there, even very productive people, have not ever done this. What is the list? It's usually no more than 10 or 15 things at most that you're committed to moving forward right now, right? Just make that list. I promise you that by itself will add tremendous clarity. Prioritize the list from most important project to least. And suddenly you know where your attention should be going, which is the top of that list. Then, if you want to take it a step further, create a new folder or tag or whatever your notes app uses for each one of those projects. And once you have a place for each of those projects, you're going to find all sorts of relevant material. Once you have a place for something, you tend to find more of it. And
mm.
you start collecting random little quotes and research and facts and statistics and websites and links and photos and graphics. And you just put each one of those in the project folder for that project. And you're like 70% of the way towards the value of a second brain.
Absolutely. I like how you described it in general as this move of divergence into convergence at a specific creative output. And this still is where that part of the journey begins. You start to filter out what is not as relevant in order to arrive at the final output. But I think you can explain it better than I can.
Yeah, no, that was a great explanation. It's basically you're turning the corner.
Hmm.
Right, like Divergence, as you said, you're collecting, acquiring, expanding your horizons, which is wonderful and beautiful and so fun if you're someone who likes to learn and likes discovering new ideas. But if that's all you ever do, you're just going to expand, 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 expand until you just like galaxy brain trying to take in the entire universe. It doesn't work. You have to have a point where you start to converge. You actually start closing in, narrowing down the range of possibilities to arrive somewhere, to arrive with some tangible result. And where that really begins is with distillation. I think this is something a lot of people really miss is you have whatever notes you've taken, even if you've been very selective and very picky, which I suggest you be, you're going to have too much. The working memory of a human mind is so tiny. We have trouble remembering a 7-digit phone number. It's like 7 single digit numbers is already starting to push the capacity of our working memory. It's crazy, right? And so you have to boil down your whatever notes you've taken to their essence, to their main points, main takeaways, main action steps. And the tool we can use to do that, actually, whether it's on paper or digitally, is highlighting. That's actually the purpose of highlighting, is to draw your attention instead of evenly across this huge wall of text, to draw it to exactly the most important and impactful points.
Mm, that's beautiful. Yeah, right when I read this part of the book, almost instantly it made sense, but even more impactfully, I refound my joy in reading books. It's really that
Wow.
big of an impact it had on me. Like reading books, sure, I've done it and they've helped me. Absolutely, they have. But especially over the past year or two, I noticed I was always finding an excuse not to read. I have this whole shelf full of books that I still want to read. But now that I read your book and this distillation process, it occurred to me that I've not gotten out of the books that I have read as much as I could have because I didn't have a method for it. I just read it and forget it pretty much. And this is a way to prevent that. And it just makes reading more involved, more impactful, but perhaps most importantly, it makes it a lot more fun. That's also what I took from it. So I immediately started, I grabbed my marker and I started highlighting my favorite quotes in your book. And that also deeply helped me structure this interview that we're having right now. And in fact, perhaps if you have a future version of this book or another book, honestly, a great way to really distill what you take from a book is to have an interview with the author, or at least pretend to, and kind of write down those questions, go on your own research, try to figure it out, and truly get the most out of it. So this was very impactful for me, I have to say. So now I am actually, yeah, my reading speed has increased, all that. It's really good.
That's amazing. I
Yeah,
love hearing
yeah.
that. I love hearing that. It's true. It's like there's nothing more fun than making progress.
Mhm.
Progress is the juice. It just feels so good to sit down, make real progress, and I kinda feel like that's what people are starving for these days. Everything just seems to go on, and there's so few clear-cut victories, clear-cut wins. And the truth is, if you go much time without a win, without some sense of completion or progress or victory, you can't maintain your motivation. You can't be happy to come to work each day just to slog through another endless pile of stuff. Like, as humans, we need these wins. And so, in a way, it's like we're setting up a way for you to win every single time you consume a piece of content, right? If you listen
Yeah.
to a podcast episode and you say one quote, that is a unarguable, clear, tangible building block that will for sure become useful in the future. If you save just a few highlights from a book, if you save a screenshot of a website, it's like, 20 or 30 times a day, I get to come away with a clear win.
Mm.
And I can't overstate the impact of that on my motivation. It sounds like you too.
Absolutely. And for anyone listening or watching this interview, make sure you also start taking notes of anything that stands out here. But I think, like you said, it is deeply motivating to have those wins. That is very true. But at the same time, I think part of the reason that it is so hard to come by these days is, I believe, to get a win, there has to be some form of struggle. You have to overcome something. And nowadays, we see that a lot of the things that would, even reading or consuming content, yeah, that is sort of a struggle, but there are lots of tools and apps and fancy quirky things that promise to take away the struggle and deliver you the value without the struggle, but it just doesn't really work that way. And a very concrete example of that, again, when it comes to reading in particular, is a service named Blinkist. I don't know if you've heard of it. It
I have,
summarizes
yeah.
books. Yeah. And it does so very well, I have to say. It's fantastic. I've listened and read summaries of books, but there is a problem to it that I discovered after reading your book. It is the takeaways that the Blinkist team thinks are most relevant for you. It's not your summary. It is not the takeaways that are most relevant to you. And
Yes.
oftentimes they're still valuable, but it's not your work that you've done to earn those, as you call them, intellectual packets, if I remember correctly, those
Intermediate
IPs.
practice. Yeah.
Intermediate, I'm sorry. Yes, IPs. You didn't go through the struggle to win those. Now,
Yes,
and what you do is you remove the struggle of not knowing how to even do it, I guess. It's more of a subconscious struggle, but you provide a method for getting those wins out of it, like a weapon to win against that struggle. So I think that's very
exactly.
useful.
It's a great observation. Yeah, the modern world is constantly making things easier, more convenient, making them into bite-sized snacks, which I don't think is inherently bad. But when it comes to thinking, when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to wisdom,
Mm,
you're getting it's like fast food. It's quick, it's convenient, and it's tasty, but there's nothing there. There's no nutrition. It's not really fueling your health and your power and your skill and creativity. You've gotta do the work yourself. You've gotta do the
mm,
work yourself. That's how you actually become smarter. You
mm.
actually become wiser is diving into the details. The details, the messy, complicated, subtle, little edge cases and exceptions and example. You gotta get your hands dirty. Now, just because you have to get your hands dirty and get in the messy details doesn't mean it has to be this just endless slog, and there's no way to do it effectively. There is, and that's what I teach. I teach ways. It's like, yes, you got to go through the jungle, but there are these tools. There's a machete, and there's a compass, and there's hiking boots, and there's, a telescope or like binoculars. There's things that make it not easy, but easier.
Right. Yeah, that's really big. And I think that's something everybody who uses or starts to dive into productivity tech as well has to remember. A lot of those companies behind the software, they often produce fantastic software. I use it myself, but I feel like sometimes they go a bit overboard in what they promise in saying this tool will make you more productive or save so many hours, etc. It might be true, but it's not the full story. You still have to make it work for you. You have to use the tool. It's not going to do the work for you. But I think
Ex-
that point is pretty clear by now. Let's move on to the final stage, which is to express. And you also have another four-step process, which is not a pleasant acronym to pronounce in one word this time. Search, browsing, tags, and serendipities. Those are four ways to retrieve past building blocks for the process of expression. And those first three definitely made sense, but I had trouble really getting the point you wanted to make with serendipity. What are those four ways of retrieving information, those building blocks, and how do you then use it to express your work?
Yeah. So serendipity, it basically means luck.
Hmm.
It's luck. And luck, we usually think of something as completely random, mysterious. You can't really do anything to create it. But I think that's not true. I think you can basically create luck. One way of doing that is to keep all these diverse, very eclectic ideas in one place, right? It's like when you have all this material from every aspect of your life, all these projects and areas and open questions and big picture things and small picture things, it's like all in one pressure cooker environment. It creates luck. Like, you happen to see things next to each other that are from very different fields, and you go, "Oh, there's a connection." You see one way of thinking juxtaposed on top of another one, and you see, "Oh, that's like a different way of seeing it." You're constantly connecting the dots, which is much easier when everything is much closer together and very concentrated. And so, my point about serendipity being sort of one way of retrieving knowledge is to just be open to that. You just gotta be open to it. That can be everything from keeping your searches a little wide. Don't just do a search for the one exact thing you're looking for. Do a few searches for some kind of related terms. It means saving imagery, right? A lot of times people want to save like facts and statistics. Also save photographs, save drawings, illustrations, diagrams, graphs. These images often kind of like in one instant can give you this impression of something that it would take many, many, hundreds of words to describe otherwise.
Mm,
And then finally, one way of amping that up is to share, right? Like we usually think of creating content as like, okay, I'm trying to like create content for my business or to grow my following. But another really powerful reason to share your ideas is to make them better, right? When you share your ideas, other people can give you feedback. They can give you critiques. They can contribute their own ideas. It's like once you put in your idea or your message or your story out there, It's like a living organism that can stand on its own 2 feet. It can start to evolve. It can start to learn. It can start to change. But that doesn't happen as long as it's secret and private in your own, in your own notes.
Right. That's also one of the early things I learned in a business course that I was a part of in my youth, where one of the key mistakes a lot of people make is they keep their great ideas to themselves and they think that people are going to steal it. It's this scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset, which I think you also talk about in your book a little bit. And in general, all of this, in fact, these practices, they, as I think Justin Welsh calls it, I also have an interview with him on the channel. It increases your surface area for luck, and I really like that way of looking at it because that's really what it is. By having all this information organized the way it is, you start to make those connections, like you said. And interestingly, that is pretty much how your first brain works as well, by making networks, associations, concept with concept, and then create something new from it. So it's really cool to see that your second brain can actually function like your first brain in that
Yeah.
respect. That's very
Yeah.
cool.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else when it comes to expression before we kind of wrap up the code methods?
Yeah, I would just say to do it.
Mm,
You can hear 100 times, okay, share your message, tell your story, find your voice, take a stand for something, write down your ideas, publish content on some platform or other. You can hear all the advice in the world, but there ultimately just comes down to this moment where you have to decide whether to do it. And you're not going to feel ready. You're not going to feel prepared. It's going to be scary. It's going to feel like people are going to criticize me. They're going to think, well, who am I to share this? Who am I to think that I deserve people's attention? But you do. I truly believe every single person in the world has some story to tell, has some piece of knowledge that someone else in the world, it could just be one other person, can benefit from. We all have an incredible wealth of knowledge. Code is just a way to capitalize on it for your benefit and also for the benefit of the people around you.
awesome. Yeah, that's a really good recap. And I hope more people watching this will now also make the leap and give it a shot at least. Now, let's talk a bit more about putting it into practice in the digital realm, because a key ingredient to a second brain is a digital note-taking app. And you talk about four key characteristics that make them ideal for helping you build your second brain. It's multimedia, informal, open-ended, and action-oriented. So could you speak a bit more to each of those characteristics and what they mean?
Yes, absolutely. So this is really just to make the case that there is one. I mean, you can use all kinds of software for this. You could use email. You could just email yourself things. You could use a drawing app, just make drawings. But I really think this category of notes apps, digital notes apps, is by far the best because, as you said, first, it can keep all kinds of content. You're not having to decide every time, okay, well, where does this go based on what kind of medium it's in? Notes apps can save text, but also images, graphics, videos, links, attachments, bookmarks, GIFs, like anything you can imagine pretty much. They're also informal. You don't have to be polished. Right? Notes are, I mean, they're notes. They're just casual. You just jot something down. Doesn't need to be perfect. Doesn't need to even be right. It's just this like little offloading of something in your head to some external place. They're also open ended. You often don't know what a note is for. You don't know where it's going to lead or end up, and that's fine. Right? You don't need to know exactly the specific use case. You just write it down and you figure it out later. And then finally, as you said, it's action oriented. Think of the situations where people commonly use notes. They use it for grocery lists, right? You're in the grocery store. You need to just have this very succinct little list of things to buy and check off. Think of pilots, taking notes on their pre-flight checklist. They're going through and checking off the boxes, making little annotations. Think of a director of a film making notes on the script. Like the places where notes show up tend to be places where there's a lot of action being taken,
Right.
which makes them, not so much a research database. There's a place for research databases, but for most of us, our normal everyday lives, just trying to get things done, we don't need a database. We don't need research. We just need these quick, little informal, little snippets of notes.
Right. And what interests me about what you just said here is these examples of the grocery list, but also certain jobs like the pilots. It happens, note taking happens where actions takes place. Yes, I agree. But at the same time, a lot of people aren't doing it. Like many pilots, they're probably fantastic and rigorous about their note taking in their profession, but that's also perhaps the only area where they do it. And this is just pure speculation. I wonder whether the perhaps somewhat traumatic experience of continuously taking notes during a school or studies and having to pass tests and hoping that your notes were good enough, it puts this kind of association with deep pressure and anxiety with noting. And at least that's what it did for me. And that's perhaps why a lot of people kind of stop doing it because they're just sick of it, or at least they're sick of what it is associated with. But then, you know, the thing with the pilots and with the grocery list, those are super tangible kinds of activities where it is virtually inescapable that a notes taking practice supports the activity. But it's not like that is the only place where it actually does. I think a lot of people just aren't aware of how much they could enrich their lives by also having it support other kinds of activities, if not all their activities, and take it to such a more meaningful level.
You're right. I think people have a tremendous amount of baggage. We have
Right.
so much baggage because all the environments where we were introduced to note taking early on, we didn't have control, we didn't have choice, we didn't have any option. It was basically stuffed down our throats in an environment of fear and scarcity and threat. You know, you had to take notes on all your classes rigorously all the time because all the grades matter the same, and every little assignment and test affects your grade, and you have to get good grades to get a good job. It's like all these very threatening consequences over taking notes the correct way, and the correct way is the way the teacher wants, writing down the
Yes.
things the teacher says, the things that are gonna be on the test, right? And I mean, often much of my work with people is not teaching them things. It's not that they're learning things, it's unlearning things.
Mm,
We have to unlearn and unravel all these associations because the truth is it's exactly what you said. For most people, they shouldn't and don't need to take notes on every aspect of their lives all the time. That's not a good use of time and energy. There's usually one or two or three very specific use cases, right? Early on, it might be something like a grocery list. Imagine if your buying of groceries took up no energy and no attention. What if that was completely on autopilot? Wouldn't imagine if you never even went beyond that? Wouldn't that be just a fantastic outcome? Like think of the return on investment over years of having a repeatable process for making a list of groceries, buying groceries, and cooking groceries. Like there's tremendous value in that. Then, although that said, you might want to expand from there. You know, if you do any kind of writing, that's a common use case. If you have to make decisions as part of your job or your business, that's probably a good thing to take notes on. If you have to develop something like a product or a proposal or a plan, that's probably a good use case. So it's like a seed that starts very small and limited and then eventually grows very bottom up and very organically. That is how you should approach this, not, okay, I'm going to completely change everything in my life with this giant top down system of completely rigid rules.
it's pretty much the same as you treat this book like you're the teacher who's going to grade you on how good your second brain is. Oh, are you making sure to take notes on everything? No, like you said, learn it in your way, in a way that works for you. That's the beauty of it as well. And I think there's many more examples that we could talk about, including one that you discuss in your book, I believe, in sales, which is an area that I also have a background in. And pre and post rigorous note taking on every prospect I spoke to in the CRM software makes all the difference. Not just for me. Later on, I became a sales leader, and in my sales teams, it was always the same. The ones that were more methodical, rigorous with making sure to offload information about a prospect, ensured that they had better close rates and bigger deals, etc. Because obviously that's also how you kind of create better relationships, by really making sure you don't forget important parts of information. You can take it as far as you need to. It will always serve you. That is really my conviction. I want to make sure we discuss two things before we run out of time. And the first of those is personal choice of apps. You talk in your book about having moved from Microsoft Word to then Google Docs and now Evernote as your tool of choice for managing your digital second brain. And I've also used it for a couple of years, but I ran into some issues, mostly concerning speed after an update they released. It got very slow to use on mobile, especially. I think it's been getting a bit better, but a lot of users are still complaining about it. So I want to hear from you. First of all, what prompted you to make those moves from Words to Docs to now Evernote? And how do you feel about Evernote currently?
Yeah, I've been on Evernote for 10 years, if you can
Mm,
believe that. I recently, in April, I think, had my 10-year anniversary.
mm,
And it's funny because, I'm this supposed thought leader about PKM and note taking. And so I think people assume, oh my gosh, he must use the most advanced, sophisticated tools. And then most of the time when they see what I use, they're like, really? Like, that's it? Because almost every productivity app that I use is at least 10 years old.
mm,
And I do that on purpose. I don't even want to touch or try something that is less than 5 years old. I have a
mm.
personal rule. I don't try betas. I don't even consider it for my own workflow until it's been extremely tried and tested by many other people because those are my everyday tools. Imagine if you're like a carpenter and you adopt this experimental new hammer, and the hammer malfunctions because it's some untested technology. That's absurd. Like you would lose a whole day of work. So I can't really afford to test new things. I like things to be mature and stable.
Right.
And Evernote, yeah, there's definitely been some difficulties. I mean, it's been slow, it's been buggy. They haven't really advanced in some time. It's basically the same software it was years ago. But I personally have no problem with that. I would much rather have those issues than the opposite issue of, oh, I have this fancy, sophisticated new thing that doesn't work at all, that is crashing or doesn't fit
Right.
into the way I do things. So sort of like you pick your poison. You don't get you
Right.
don't get the best of both worlds. You have to choose this side or that side.
That makes sense. That makes sense. You prefer a tool with a proven track record because it's just so essential. And let's not forget, it also hosts a lot of well, I was going to say sensitive information, but I do believe you actually advocate against doing that in that same system. You want to, well, somehow lock it up more securely, of course, like your social security information, just to name an example. I guess putting that in a sort of digital vault is a better practice than keeping that in the same place as your grocery list with the same level of access, so to speak. But
Yeah,
either way, it has to have this kind of track record of usability, stability, and that makes sense. I use TickTick right now. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I have. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I recently moved to it from Todoist, which has a long proven track record and it's great, but I was just missing some functionality with note taking, so I moved and it has a long proven track records. When it comes to privacy, it's a bit iffy. So that's the poison I picked at this point in time. But like you said, you're never gonna well, maybe in the future, but as of now, you're never going to get the ultimate perfect app unless perhaps you build it yourself or you know what you're doing. Last question then. I'm, as I said, an avid practitioner of another productivity methods, which is this one right here, Getting Things Done by David Allen, who also actually does recommend your book and your work in general. And we talked about the way of organizing with Para, which is somewhat different than what GTD advocates as well. So I am just wondering, in your own words, what kind of relationship does the code approach have with GTD? Are they compatible? Is it more like GTD 2.0 in your mind, or does it have a different relationship with GTD altogether?
I would say it's an extension of the same principles.
Mm,
GTD is timeless. It's really an evergreen set of principles that I think will always apply. But GTD is focused on actionable information, tasks, and to do. What I'm really focused on is what's called non-actionable or reference material or just notes. Right? It's
mm,
information that is not the actual action that you are taking, but is all the supporting material that informs and allows that action to be successful. So it's almost like the left side hemisphere and the right side hemisphere
yeah.
of the first brain, there's 2 hemispheres of the second brain, which is actionable and reference.
That's the beautiful way of looking at it. Well, that is powerful because I can totally imagine what you mean. And I will be sure to dedicate some more time of that in future videos where I also discuss tech and tutorials and how you can make them work. Because I think I will also implement a lot of this in conjunction with GTD now that you've put it this way. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, we're out of time. There's a lot more questions that I have. Perhaps we can ask those in another time in another video, but I do want to respect your time. So I'm going to leave you with one last question, which is, where can people find you and what can you help them with?
I can help them capitalize on the full value of their knowledge, really realize the value of everything they already know and already have access to. And you can find everything at buildingasecondbrain.com.
Perfect. Well, I'm sure you can also order the book there as well, which has been out for, I think, just over a month or two. It is doing very well on Amazon and other places. So congratulations on that. It's well deserved. So this book right here, Building a Second Brain, written by Tiago Forte. Tiago, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Lucas.